4545 performance, and I actually think that separating them as measures is really helpful to us as leaders. So I wanted to walk back through very quickly. So how do these two measures, annual growth and 4545 performance, how do they build to a third measure called academic growth? And how can we continue to kind of unpack the measures themselves to help us better understand instructional focus areas and instructional leadership? How can we as leaders help support teachers in talking about growth? So, in chat, there's a question that
John does these live, so there's a little chat thing when he says that. There's someone who's chatting in, so just listen to this kind of action. Will you raise your hand if that thing looks familiar?
Yes.
Okay, cool. And if it doesn't, don't worry about it. You won't get lost. But all it's saying is, on this side was our star performance for 2022, and across the top is star performance 2023. So if a kid was at meets, and they were at meets, this year they would fall in this box. Okay, so that's it. You'll get the gist of it, but the main thing is just thinking about the idea of growth. So don't worry about the tool if that's confusing.
path file came out. Is there anything that would change in that? No. So that's a nice thing to clarify. Nothing in the to the administrator address letter talks about changing the calculation of any of the scores, and certainly doesn't in any way impact this, the star performance categories for students. So it's a nice way to continue to help folks understand that the letter that came out is about how do you scale the growth score, not how do you calculate the growth score. So the CAF is out, it is final, because nothing is changing. TA in the letter in no way indicated that there would be a change in the calculation of the score. So nothing in the CAF would change. What's the best way to use it? This person, Lori indicated she's uploaded it to ODS. I would suggest talking directly to your data vendors in terms of utilizing the CAF. It's an enormous data file, and for many, many districts, it's not uploadable, and so it is not that helpful. In terms of looking forward, I mean, the transition table model for STAR looked at how kids did, what was their performance category, and I keep using these terms very, very intentionally. The students' individual scale score is not what is being looked at, it is the student's performance category. Now, the scale score the student earned does identify the student's performance category, but TA is not looking at a mathematical difference between scale scores. They're simply looking at what was the performance category on last year's test, what is the performance category on this year's test. And based on mapping those two data points for each test, for each student, then TA calculates annual growth, 45, and academic growth. Now, how do they calculate that? Well, in this table, any of the red cells generate 0 points. The blue highlighted cells generate a half a point, some growth, and green generates a full point. You calculate, you add up all of your points, you divide by the number of tests, and you get an annual growth score. Now, I think the best way or the easiest way to make sense of it, so what does the annual growth score mean? Well, I think it is a measure of what percent of students made 1 year growth for 1 year of instruction. And so when we as leaders think about, what we absolutely want is for every single student to make at least 1 year growth for 1 year of instruction. It puts our annual growth number in a context then of, well, if it's not where we want it to be, how do we continue to help teachers focus on growth? 45 only looks at the top 2 rows of the transition table model, and in all of the tools that we are generating, we meaning Accountability Connect, and all of the tools that we are generating, we are reproducing those numbers in a separate table called 45 so that you can kind of clearly see, for purposes of 45, is the student or does the result indicate success or not? And 4545 to me has a slightly different goal than growth, because 4545 is about moving students from failing the test to passing the test. But we get a measure in this transition table model of, for the students who failed the previous year's test, what % passed this year's test? And that's what that 4545 number tells us. And I think this is a really powerful number for principals, particularly looking at academic growth and STAR. This is a reflection of the effectiveness of our 4545 intervention services, because our 4545 intervention services are intended to help students be successful on this year's test after they failed last year's test. And then taken together, the annual growth and 4545 combine to give us the academic growth calculation. So we take all of the annual growth points that we earned, we take the 4545 points that we earned and weight them at a quarter point each. So it's a little bit of a bonus. We then add up those to get to our academic growth points, divide by the number of tests, and we get our academic growth score. Now, another way, and many of you know I like cute little pictures to try to depict things. I think annual growth is the cake, and 4545 is icing on the cake. I think annual growth is essentially an evaluation of the effectiveness of Tier 1 instruction, and 4545 is, in essence, or in short, an evaluation of the effectiveness of our Tier 2, Tier 3 intervention. Now, these are the cut points in the current manual, meaning what would it take to get an A for academic growth, and you can see that in the proposed manual, those cut points to get an A for traditional campuses is an 85, and you can see the proposed cut points for the other letter grades. This is the table that's under reconstruction. So I just wanted to show it to say that's the starting point. Now, I think TA is pretty clear in the letter that none of the cut points are going to go up. They're all going to be adjusted downward. So when we look at what will it take to get an A for academic growth, I'm going to guess it's going to be a number below 85. What will it take to get a B for academic growth? It will be a number below whatever number is appearing in this table. And then all of the other potential actual academic growth scores from 0 to 100 will also have a scaling conversion. For the last 5 years, I've suggested that when we talk about academic growth, that we set our sights on something easy, like drive for 85, strive for 85. I like 85 because it rhymes with lots of things. I like it because it's a nice, clear number. And it's pretty clear to me that if we, as campuses, come anywhere close to an 85, we'll get an A for growth. And if we get an A for growth, of course, our accountability will look good as well. So let's just look at a transition table model, the one that I've just been using as an example. And every time that I work with somebody about the transition table model, I always start at the bottom row. And I say, okay, on this particular screen, we had 8 students who scored masters last year. How many of those students scored masters again? Well, on this table, it's clear 4, and then 4 students were what I call performance problems. They dropped to something lower than masters. So as we start to move from looking at what our academic growth actually looked like for 2023, and start to envision what could it look like for 2024, and if so, what impact might it have? I like to start with the question, well, what if we had kept masters at masters? Meaning, what if all 8 kids who scored masters again? If so, that's what this transition table model would look like. What if all of the students who scored meets again? Well, that's what that second row at the bottom would look like. What if all of the students who scored high approaches or better this year, and just kind of continue what if students had maintained or done better? And what if we had just been able to help kids who scored low, did not meet, at least get to high, did not meet? So this still has a fair number of results in blue where we, quote, only get half a point. But the reality is if we can approach a world where every single student makes academic growth, where we have zeros in the reds, what we end up with is an annual growth score, an 84. We would then get the benefit of our 45-45. And, I know I'm going through this quickly, when we get to an academic growth, which is a combination of our annual growth and 45-45, we would end up with a number comfortably above 85. I'm going to say comfortably above whatever cut score TA is going to set for growth for 2023. And when they set the cut score for growth for 2023, as they've said to the administrator just letter, their intention is that then would stay constant for 5 years, which therefore then becomes our target for this year as well. We get anywhere close to an 85, it will translate to an A, and for elementary and middle schools, it then becomes 70% of our rating, and because it's half of domain 3, would ultimately be 85% of our rating. Growth, I think, also becomes a huge value to high schools as high schools continue to get challenged or stressed with the increase in rigor of the CCMR conversation. Growth for high schools is about performance on English 1 and English 2 and Algebra 1. So I think it then becomes the focus and the